And I'm going to read you one sentence that's in the statement of need. And in the assessment of the statement of need, the sentence is, by the reviewer, I don't see a compelling argument for why this program needs to exist in a charter school or why Gloucester needs a charter school. And that comes as part of the review process from the charter school office. So if I may, I'm just going to pass that out to you as well. In addition to the statement of need, there's also a recommendation of the charter school office. And the recommendation states, recommendation, do not recommend. And I'll give that to you as well. Madam Chairwoman, I give you these pages of information to talk about the process. Because as we look at the process, the next thing that happens in the chronology of events is the Commissioner comes out and makes a recommendation to go forward. And in a release of the Commissioner's recommendation, it says that that recommendation was based on two major pieces of information, a panel review of the application and the public hearing. Well, you see from the panel review that the recommendation was not to recommend going forward. In terms of the public hearing, we have a public hearing that is inconsistent with state law and regulation because no board member is present. So let me too just give you a copy of the press release on the recommendation. Now, this is all leading up to the hearing, Madam Chairwoman. At the hearing which I was present on, in which there was a vote. So not the hearing to collect information, but the actual hearing in which the votes would be cast by the board. It was brought up by both the mayor and the superintendent that they wanted to bring up information as to financial adequacy, the $30,000. And on the information of financial adequacy, there's an exchange between the commissioner and one of the board members in which commissioner says, don't put that information forward. Board member says, if it's information that's been brought up or raised through the application process, then there should be an opportunity to rebut that information. However, that opportunity to rebut, and the mayor will speak more about it, was denied in the process as well. Finally, Madam Chair, it was brought to my attention, although I was in attendance as the hearing as well, that the Secretary of Education, who is a voting member of the board, didn't show up and instead sent a proxy. And there's a question as to whether or not that was appropriate. In the first instance, I tell you it's a legitimate question because the vote was 5-5. And the Secretary had to cast the tie-breaking vote. The reason it's been questioned as to whether or not it's appropriate is because that we know as legislators when we vote on legislation to go forward, or when there's a legislative body that has to vote on something to go forward, it's rare that there's an exception allowed to allow proxies to be able to stand in our places and in the places of executive officials. So again, it's a question for you to ask the Board of Education. In conclusion, Madam Chairwoman, I would say this, that where there was no board member present at the hearing, where there's confusion as to whether Gloucester has 30,000 residents or not, where there's a potential conflict of interest, where there were material changes in the application, where the summary statement of need says that the need is not evident, where there's a recommendation not to recommend, where a board member at a hearing states that board members should have been allowed to hear additional information, where the Secretary sends his proxy to break a 5-5 vote, that the question has to be asked, did this process follow controlling statutes, regulations, and procedures, or did it follow some other policy of some unwritten rule that one charter school has to go forward or must go forward or needs to go forward to appease some sort of political group? That's the question that rests in my mind. or doesn't rest in my mind. That's the question that instigates my mind. It's the question that's been raised by many of my constituents. And it's a question that I hope that this oversight hearing will address. Again, I thank you for your time. I thank you for your attention to these important matters. And I thank you for taking the initiative to come up here this evening to hear these issues and to hear them out and to hopefully help us answer those questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Senator Bruce Tarr.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you very much for coming to Gloucester for what is a critical issue for all of us on a great number of fronts that I hope to address in just a couple of minutes. In thanking you, I also want to thank Speaker DeLeo and also Senate President Murray for the interest that they've shown in this issue and the understanding that they have of the broad implications for the issue that is currently before the committee, not only for the students and citizens of Gloucester, but also for students and citizens all across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I also want to thank Commissioner Chester for being here and Chairman Banta, as well as the members of our own school committee and Superintendent Farmer and Mayor Kirk and other local officials. And most of all, Madam Chair, I want to thank all of the folks that are in this audience tonight, those who have been proponents of a charter school, those who have been opponents of a charter school, all who care very deeply about education in the city of Gloucester and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And Madam Chair, I would ask you to consider one question as you go through this hearing and as you listen to testimony and as you ask the thoughtful questions that I know you will ask as customary practice. And that is, on what basis was the charter in this particular instance granted? And I'd like you to measure that against the rules and the regulations that have been put forward by those of us who are legislators and those of us who are regulators. Because when I suggest, Madam Chair, that there are broad implications here, I mean just that. This is one of the most spirited debates I have ever witnessed about public education anywhere in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and it's certainly one of the most spirited that the city of Gloucester has ever seen. And Madam Chair, if there is a silver lining in all of the controversy that has surrounded this process, it is that Gloucester, through its passion and through its expression and through its commitment, has once again demonstrated its deep caring about the education of its students. And so I would suggest to you that when we have those interests, and we have other interests, because I note with interest that submitting statements about this very charter were also the Mayor of New Bedford, Scott Lang, and the Mayor of Salem, Kim Driscoll. So when we look at all of that, I think we have to suggest, in fact, I think we have to demand, that everyone involved in this process deserves to have a process that has integrity, that has predictability, that has accountability, and that has transparency. And I would suggest to you, Madam Chair, that on all of those fronts, we find things wanting here tonight, as we have throughout the process. Madam Chair, it has been said, and I agree with the statement, that this community will not be able to move forward without having the issues that are raised before you tonight addressed and addressed properly. And I would suggest to you, Madam Chair, that it is not fair to the students of this city, to the opponents of this charter and the proponents of this charter, to make them continue to have to live with the cloud that lives over this application. Why do I say that? I return to my original premise. What was the basis for the granting of this charter? Was it the demonstration of support that is required under the law? Well, we see in testimony that's been presented to you by Representative Ferranti that the Commission and the DESE did not verify that there was that support. There was an alleged petition of 400 signatures. The first page of that was received, and in the written correspondence which we've provided you with tonight, the confirmation was never had. Was it the fact that the application was properly before the committee when it took the opportunity to approve it? Well, one of the issues is the 30,000 population that is requisite in order to have a singular charter school as opposed to a regional charter school. I have looked at the record and would suggest to you that any verification of that population is wanting